What happens when Chicago's most ruthless underworld boss tries to publicly humiliate the only woman brave enough to serve him? He expected her to shatter. Instead, the 260-pound diner waitress made the cold-blooded kingpin drop to his knees. This is a story of curves, cruelty, and unforgiving revenge. The air inside Giovanni's prime always smelled of roasting garlic, expensive cigars, and, on certain Tuesday nights, pure fear. Clara Jenkins was acutely aware of the shift in the room's atmosphere before she even turned the round from the espresso machine. The low murmur of wealthy patrons died out, replaced by the clinking of silverware on china and the nervous clearing of throats. Clara didn't need to look to know who had just walked through the brass-handled double doors. It was Dominic Russo. Dominic wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was the undisputed boss of the Russo Syndicate, a man whose legitimate front in real estate barely concealed the blood on his hands. He moved like a predator, silent, composed, and terrifyingly arrogant. Flanked by his two enforcers, a stoic giant named Victor and a twitchy younger man named Leo, Dominic claimed his usual corner booth. It was the booth with its back to the wall and a clear view of every exit. Clara, his poorly dites, the restaurant's balding, chronically sweating manager. He grabbed her thick forearm, his fingers trembling. "They're in your section. Do not look him in the eye. Just take the order nod and get back here. Understand?" Clara wiped her hands on her apron. She was 26, stood 5'7", and carried 260 pounds on a frame that made no apologies. Her apron strings dug into the deep curve of her waist, and her thick thighs chafed under her black uniform skirt. She knew how the world saw her invisible until she was in the way, a punchline for cruel men. But Clara had spent her whole life building an armor thicker than her flesh. "Relax, Paulie," Clara said, her voice a calm, husky drawl. "He puts his pants on one leg at a time like everyone else. He just happens to murder people in his." She grabbed a silver pitcher of ice water and a leather-bound menu, making her way across the dining room. As she approached the booth, the sheer magnetism of Dominic Russo became suffocating. He had pitch-black hair swept back from a sharp, aristocratic face, and eyes the color of bruised steel. He was immaculately dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that clung to broad, muscular shoulders. "Gentlemen," Clara said evenly, setting the water glasses down. "Welcome to Giovanni's. Can I start you off with something from the bar?" Dominic didn't look at the menu. He didn't even look at her face. His cold eyes slowly dragged down her body, taking in the heavy swell of her breasts, the wide flare of her hips, and the undeniable bulk of her silhouette. A sneer curled the corner of his perfectly sculpted mouth. "Victor," Dominic said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that carried just enough to ensure the surrounding tables heard him. "When I pay $10,000 a month for priority seating at this establishment, I expect a certain level of aesthetic grace. Tell me, did they run out of waitresses and hire a parade float?" Leo snorted loudly. Victor smirked, crossing his massive arms. The heavy, suffocating silence fell over the adjacent tables. Paulie, watching from the kitchen doors, looked like he was about to pass out. Most women would have flushed, stammered, or burst into tears. Clara had heard worse from high school bullies, but the casual, devastating cruelty of this grown, powerful man ignited a quiet, freezing rage in her chest. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't drop her gaze. She simply tilted the silver pitcher and began pouring ice water into Dominic's glass. She poured until it reached the brim, and then she kept pouring. The freezing water cascaded over the rim, spilling onto the pristine white tablecloth and splashing directly onto the sleeve of Dominic's $3,000 suit jacket. "What the hell are you doing?" Dominic barked, jumping up as the icy water soaked his cuff. Victor's hand instantly flew to the bulge inside his jacket. Clara placed the pitcher down with a loud, definitive clap. "My apologies, Mr. Russo," Clara said, her voice dripping with lethal sweetness. "I thought a man with such a massive ego could handle a little extra volume. Seems you're incredibly fragile." The restaurant went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop, Leo's jaw unhinged. Victor froze, waiting for the order to draw his weapon. Dominic stood there, water dripping from his expensive cuff, staring at the plus-sized waitress who had just openly mocked him in his own territory. The steel in his eyes darkened to a violent storm. He stepped into her personal space, towering over her. Clara tipped her chin up, refusing to retreat a single inch. She could smell his cologne bergamot and expensive leather, mixed with the faint metallic scent of gunpowder. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to, sweetheart?" Dominic whispered, his voice vibrating with menace. "I could have you ground into sausage meat before your shift ends. And then who would bring your steak?" Clara shot back, her heart hammering violently against her ribs, though her face remained a mask of stone. "You want to shoot me over a water spill? Go ahead. But unless you're going to pull the trigger, sit down and tell me how you want your ribeye cooked. I have other tables." For 5 agonizing seconds, Dominic glared at her. The vein in his neck pulsed. He was a man who demanded the world kneel for him, yet this heavy, unapologetic woman was looking at him like he was a nuisance. Slowly, incredibly, a dark, dangerous chuckle rumbled in Dominic's chest. He sat back down, waving Victor off. "Medium rare," Dominic said softly, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. "And if it's overcooked, I won't just complain to the manager. I'll burn this place to the ground with you in it." "Medium rare," Clara wrote on her pad. "Try not to cry if it comes out medium." She turned on her heel and walked away. She could feel his eyes burning into her back with every step, analyzing the heavy sway of her hips. When she pushed through the kitchen doors, her knees finally gave out. She grabbed the stainless steel prep counter, gasping for air. "Are you insane?" Bolly shrieked, grabbing his non-existent hair. "He's going to kill us. He's going to kill all of us." "He's a bully with a trust fund and a gun, Paulie," Clara muttered, trying to steady her shaking hands. But she knew the truth. She had just drawn a target on her own back. When Dominic and his men left 2 hours later, Clara went to clear their table. Sitting under his empty whiskey glass with a brand-new, crisp $100 bill, and written in elegant, sharp cursive on a napkin was a single sentence: "You have a big mouth for a fat girl. I'll enjoy shutting it." The following 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare. True to his terrifying reputation, Dominic Russo did not forget the slight. Instead of having Clara quietly disposed of, he decided to make her life a living hell. He became a daily fixture at Giovanni's Prime. He would come in for lunch and demand she serve him. He would casually stretch his legs into the narrow aisles, forcing Clara to squeeze her large frame past him, humiliating her in front of his associates. He made cutting remarks about her diet, asked if the kitchen had enough inventory to feed the guests after she had her shift meal, and tipped her in gym membership brochures instead of cash. Clara lived in a tiny, drafty apartment on 43rd Street, constantly fighting with a landlord named Arthur Pendleton over a broken radiator. She didn't have the luxury of quitting. She needed the tips to pay for her mother's physical therapy in Ohio. So, she swallowed the fear and fought back the only way she knew how, with ironclad defiance. When Dominic left a gym brochure, Clara donated $20 to a local pig rescue under the name Dominic Russo and taped the thank you certificate to his reserved table. When he complained that the booths were too small for someone of her immense gravity, she loudly offered to bring him a booster seat so he could feel bigger. The back and forth became a bizarre, toxic dance. Dominic was infuriated by her refusal to break, yet entirely captivated by it. No one spoke to him this way. Men cowered. Beautiful, slim women threw themselves at his feet, begging for a scrap of his attention. Cara, with her thick arms, wide belly, and sharp tongue, looked at him with nothing but pure disdain. The twisted dynamic violently shattered on a rainy Thursday night. The dinner rush had ended. Clara was wiping down the mahogany bar while Paulie counted the register in the back office. The front door swung open, but it wasn't Dominic. It was the O'Connor brothers. Liam and Sean O'Connor were debt collectors for Declan Gallagher, the brutal head of the Irish mob operating out of the South Side. They were hulking, ugly men with scarred knuckles and a reputation for breaking femurs before asking questions. "Where's Paulie?" Liam barked, his boots leaving muddy tracks on the carpet. Clara immediately felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. He's gone for the night. We're closed. You need to leave. Sean stepped up to the bar, his eyes raking over Clara's body with blatant disgust. Shut up, porkchop. We know he's in the back. Gallagher wants his protection money. Giovanni's is 3 weeks late. Clara gripped the wet rag in her hand. She didn't know Paulie had been paying the Irish mon. This was strictly Russo territory. If Gallagher was moving in on the West Loop, a turf war was brewing. I said, we're closed, Clara repeated, stepping out from behind the bar to block the hallway leading to the office. Leon laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Look at the size of this bitch. Thinks she's a bouncer. He stepped forward and shoved Clara hard in the chest. Clara stumbled backward, her heavy frame colliding violently with a busing station. A tray of glasses shattered on the floor, slicing into her calves. Pain flared, but adrenaline masked it. Don't touch me, Clara snarled, grabbing a heavy glass ketchup bottle from a nearby table. I'll carve you like a Christmas ham, Sean hissed, pulling a serrated hunting knife from his belt and lunging at her. Before Sean could cross the distance, the front door violently shattered inward. Dominic Russo stood in the doorway, his charcoal coat soaked with rain, his face a terrifying mask of predatory rage. Victor and Leo were right behind him, guns already drawn. Drop the knife, Sean, Dominic commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a physical blade. The O'Connor brothers froze. They recognized the apex predator of Chicago. Russo, Liam stammered, raising his hands. This ain't your business. Gallagher claims this joint now. Paulie owes us. Gallagher doesn't claim the dirt on my shoes, Dominic said smoothly, stepping into the dining room. He didn't look at Clara, but his aura was suffocatingly protective. And nobody comes into my city, smashes my tables, and lays a hand on what belongs to me. Clara's jaw tightened. What belongs to me? She wasn't an object, and she certainly wasn't his. Without warning, Dominic moved. For a man in a tailored suit, his speed was demonic. He closed the gap between him and Sean O'Connor in 2 strides. He didn't use a gun. Dominic grabbed Sean's wrist, twisting it until a sickening snap echoed through the room. As Sean screamed, dropping the knife, Dominic drove his knee upward, crushing the Irishman's face with a wet crunch. Sean collapsed, unconscious and bleeding profusely onto the expensive rug. Liam yelled and reached for his jacket, but Victor was already there, pressing the barrel of a silenced pistol hard into Liam's temple. Pick up your garbage, Dominic whispered to Liam, wiping a speck of blood from his cuff. Tell Declan if he sends his mutts into my territory again, I'll mail them back to him in dog food cans. Get out. Liam, trembling, hauled his unconscious brother up by the collar and dragged him out into the rain. The restaurant was silent again, save for the sound of the storm outside. Dominic slowly turned to look at Clara. She was backed against the wall, breathing heavily, a thin trail of blood running down her shin from the shattered glass. Her apron was dirty, her hair a mess. He walked toward her, his dark eyes locked onto hers. The danger radiating from him was palpable. He stopped near inches away, his chest almost brushing against her heavy breasts. He reached out, his leather-gloved hand gently touching the side of her face. The contrast of his violent hands acting with such startling tenderness sent a confusing electric jolt down Clara's spine. You're bleeding, he murmured, his thumb brushing over her jawline. I'm fine, Clara snapped, slapping his hand away. She hated how her voice trembled. I didn't need your help. Dominic's eyes darkened, the tenderness instantly evaporating, replaced by his trademark towering arrogance. He leaned in, his lips hovering just an inch from her ear. You were about to be gutted by Irish trash, Clara, he whispered, his voice a dark, velvet threat. I just saved your life. Most women would be on the floor kissing my shoes right now. He pulled back, looking down at her with that familiar, mocking superiority. Go on, kneel for me. Thank me properly. Clara stared at him. She tasted copper in her mouth where she had bitten her lip during the fall. She looked at this beautiful, terrifying man who thought he could buy her dignity with fear. She spat a small drop of blood directly onto his polished Italian leather shoe. "Go to hell, Dominic," Clara said, her voice rock steady. "I don't kneel for men who have to buy their respect." Dominic looked down at the blood on his shoe and then slowly back up to her face. The silence stretched until it felt like a piano wire pulled taut enough to decapitate them both. He didn't strike her, he didn't yell. Instead, a muscle feathered in his jaw, and a profound, dangerous hunger sparked in the depths of his cold steel eyes. He stepped back, staring at her as if seeing her for the very first time. "We'll see about that," he promised softly, turning and walking out into the rain. The following Monday, Paulie Dietz was gone. In his place stood a sharply dressed lawyer named Harrison Fletcher, who politely informed the staff of Giovanni's Primed that the establishment had been bought out entirely by Russo Enterprises. Clara's heart plummeted into her stomach. Dominic hadn't just escalated their war, he had bought the battlefield. Yet the torment completely stopped. Dominic no longer tripped her. He no longer left insulting pamphlets. Instead, he simply sat in his corner booth, watching her. His bruised steel eyes tracked every heavy sway of her hips, every confident pivot on her thick legs, and the way she hoisted loaded trays that made the male waiters sweat. The silence was far more unnerving than his insults. It was the calculated patience of a wolf studying a cage he didn't quite know how to unlock. But Clara's defiance had rippled much further than the walls of the restaurant. Declan Gallagher, the ruthless head of the Irish mob, was out for blood. The broken jaw Dominic had gifted Sean O'Connor was an act of war. And Gallagher wasn't a man who fought fair. Word on the street, fueled by the whispers of corrupt city officials like Alderman Stephen Croft, was that the untouchable Dominic Russo had a bizarre, inexplicable blind spot, a fat, loud-mouthed waitress from the West Loop. They decided to hit Dominic where they thought he was weakest. It happened on a freezing Tuesday night. Clara had just unlocked the door to a cramped apartment on 43rd Street, shivering as the draft cut through her cheap winter coat. The hallway was dark, too dark. The overhead bulb had been smashed. Before she could reach for the light switch, a massive hand clamped down over her mouth, tasting of stale tobacco and grease. "Don't make a sound, pig," a gruff voice hissed in her ear. Another man kicked the door shut behind them, plunging the room into shadows. It was Liam O'Connor, accompanied by a hulking enforcer Clara didn't recognize. Panic seized Clara's chest, but she forcefully shoved it down. Years of being targeted for her size had taught her one fundamental truth. She was not small, and she refused to act like it. "Russell's gonna watch us carve you up before we put a bullet in him," Liam sneered, pulling a heavy revolver from his waistband. He shoved her violently toward the center of the living room, expecting her to stumble and fall. He severely underestimated her center of gravity. Clara planted her thick, sturdy legs and absorbed the shove without toppling. Instead of cowering, she used the momentum to spin around, swinging her heavy leather purse like a medieval flail. The solid brass buckle caught Leon dead in the temple with a sickening crack. He dropped the gun, howling in pain as he stumbled backward. The second man lunged at her, wrapping his arms around her wide waist to tackle her to the floor. Clara roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. She threw her entire 260-pound weight backward, crushing the man against the wall. The plaster cracked under the sheer force of the impact, and the air left his lungs in a sharp wheeze. She wasn't a delicate flower to be plucked. She was a boulder rolling downhill. Clara elbowed him viciously in the ribs, but Liam was recovering. He grabbed a heavy floor lamp and swung it hard, striking Clara across the shoulder. Pain exploded down her arm, dropping her to her knees. She gasped, vision swimming as Liam wrecked the slide of his retrieved pistol, pointing it right at her forehead. "Cute trick, fatty," Liam spat, blood pouring from his temple. "Say goodnight." Bang! Bah! The gunshot deafened Clara, but the pain never came. Instead, Liam's eyes rolled back into his head, and he collapsed onto her cheap linoleum floor in a lifeless heap. Standing in the doorway was Dominic Russo. His charcoal suit was torn and blood was rapidly soaking through the left side of his crisp white shirt. He had a suppressed pistol in his hand, smoke curling from the barrel. He had been ambushed downstairs, his enforcers nowhere in sight. The second hitman, realizing the boss himself was here, abandoned Clara and charged Dominic with a switchblade. Dominic, weakened by the bullet in his side, raised his gun, but the man tackled him into the narrow hallway. The gun skittered across the floor. The hitman raised the knife, aiming for Dominic's throat. "Hey!" Clara bellowed. She didn't look for a weapon. She became one. Clara charged with explosive speed, hitting the attacker with the full, devastating force of a linebacker. Her shoulder connected with his chest, lifting him entirely off Dominic. They crashed into Clara's notoriously broken cast-iron radiator. The rusty pipe groaned and snapped. Scalding, pressurized water erupted from the fixture, blasting the hitman in the face. He screamed, scrambling blindly toward the door and fleeing down the stairs into the night. The apartment fell dead silent, save for the hissing steam of the broken radiator and the heavy, ragged breathing of two survivors. Clara slowly pushed herself up, her uniform torn, her shoulder throbbing in agony. She looked down at the feared kingpin of Chicago's underworld. Dominic was slumped against the wall, clutching his bleeding side. His skin was deathly pale. The arrogant smirk was completely gone. "You," Dominic rasped, staring at her in absolute shock. "You just saved your mobster ass." Clara finished, grabbing a dish towel to press against his bleeding wound. "Yeah, let's see your skinny supermodels carry your dead weight out of here before the cops arrive." She hauled him to his feet. He was pure, dense muscle, but Clara wrapped her thick arm around his waist, stabilizing him against her own wide, sturdy hips. For the first time in his life, Dominic Russo leaned completely on someone else. Dominic's underground safe house was a sprawling, sterile penthouse in a Gold Coast. Clara had managed to get him into the private elevator just as he passed out from blood loss. Victor and Leo arrived 20 minutes later with an underground doctor taking over the grim task of digging Gallagher's bullet out of their boss's ribs. Clara sat in the opulent, dimly lit living room, her ruined apron discarded on $1 million leather sofa. She was exhausted, bruised, and covered in both her own blood and Dominic's. She should have run. She had enough cash in her emergency fund to buy a bus ticket back to Ohio, but a strange magnetic pull kept her anchored to the spot. 2 hours later, the heavy oak doors of the master bedroom clicked open. Dominic stood there. He was bare-chested, heavily bandaged across his torso, wearing only dark slacks. He looked raw, stripped of his sharp suits and intimidating armor. He moved slowly, wincing with every step, until he stood in front of where Clara sat. "The doctor said I lost a lot of blood," Dominic murmured, his gravelly voice softer than she had ever heard it. "He said, if you hadn't put pressure on the wound and carried me to the car, I would have bled out on your ugly linoleum floor. I'll send you a bill for the dry cleaning," Clara said dryly, refusing to break eye contact, and the radiator. Dominic didn't laugh. He stared down at her, his dark eyes tracing the heavy, unapologetic curves of her body, the thick thighs pressed together on his couch, the soft, wide swell of her stomach, the broad shoulders that had just thrown a grown man across a room. The mockery and disdain that usually danced in his eyes were entirely gone. In their place was something that looked terrifyingly like reverence. "Why did you fight for me, Clara?" he asked quietly. "I've been nothing but a monster to you. I insulted you. I humiliated you, because I am not you," Clara said fiercely, her voice shaking slightly with the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "You think power is about tearing people down. You look at me, and you just see a target because I don't fit into your perfect tailored world. I fought because I don't let bullies win, not Gallagher's men, and not you." Dominic stepped closer. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his feverish skin. "I didn't target you because you don't fit in, Clara," Dominic confessed, the words seemingly ripped from his chest against his will. "I targeted you because you're the only real thing I've seen in 10 years. Clara's breath hitched. "Everyone lies to me," Dominic continued, his voice trembling with a dark, desperate intensity. "They bow, they scrape, they agree with whatever I say because they're terrified. But you poured ice water on me. You looked me in the eye and told me to go to hell. Your strength, your resilience, it drove me insane. I wanted to break you just to prove you were like everyone else. But you didn't break, you just grew more beautiful. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. You are a queen, Clara, he whispered, a warrior wrapped in soft curves. And I was too arrogant, too stupid to see it until you were standing over me, fighting my battles. Clara stood up. She was inches away from him, her generous chest brushing against his bandaged ribs. She didn't melt into his confession. She kept her spine steel straight. Words are cheap, Dominic, Clara said, her husky voice laced with authority. You told me once that I had a big mouth for a fat girl. You demanded that I kneel for you. You thought you could break my pride because I wear a bigger dress size. Dominic's jaw tightened. The shame in his eyes was vivid and entirely real. I was wrong, he said flatly. Prove it, Clara challenged. Silence stretched through the massive penthouse, heavy and suffocating. Dominic Rousseau was the king of the Chicago underworld. He answered to no one. He bowed to no one. He commanded legions of violent men and controlled millions in illicit wealth. Dominic looked into Clara's fierce, beautiful eyes. And then, slowly, agonizingly, the Mafia Boss began to lower himself. He ignored the searing pain in his wounded side. He sank down until his knees hit the expensive hardwood floor. He was entirely at her feet, looking up at the magnificent, plus-sized woman who had shattered his ego and saved his life. He reached forward, taking her thick, beautiful hands in his own, and pressed his lips reverently against her knuckles. I, Dominic Rousseau, am on my knees, he whispered, staring up at her with complete, unconditional surrender. I am sorry, Clara. I am yours. Command me. Clara looked down at the ruthless kingpin, his pride completely broken and remade in her image. The slow, victorious smile spread across her lips. She gently pulled her hand free, reaching down to cup his cheek. Good boy, Clara murmured. Now get up. We have an Irish mob to dismantle. Did Clara's incredible strength leave you speechless? Sometimes the most powerful queens don't wear a size 0, they wear their curves like unbreakable armor. If you loved watching this arrogant mafia boss finally drop to his knees and beg for his plus-sized queen, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their fierce worth, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling.
The terrified maid screamed as long strands of dark chestnut hair slid into her trembling lap. Standing behind her with a pair of silver scissors, Vanessa Sterling smiled with quiet satisfaction. Maybe now, she said, loud enough for every servant in the room to hear. You'll remember your place. Not a single person moved. Housekeepers lowered their eyes. Bodyguards stared at the marble floor. Even the senior butler remained frozen. Everyone knew that opposing the Mafia Boss's fiancée could end a career, or something far worse. The woman kneeling on the polished floor never cried. Instead, Ivy Bennett calmly gathered the uneven locks resting around her feet. She ran her fingers through what remained of the waist-length hair her grandmother had once called a woman's dignity. For several long seconds, the grand hall was silent enough to hear every shaky breath. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Ivy gently took the scissors from Vanessa's hand, without anger, without tears, without raising her voice. She cut away the remaining length herself until every strand rested just below her chin. She looked directly into Vanessa's eyes. You just made a mistake you'll never understand. Then she handed the scissors back, smoothed the wrinkles from her maid's apron, and quietly returned to work. No one inside the Morelli estate realized that, before the week was over, the mansion that seemed impossible to shake would begin collapsing. Not because of violence, betrayal, or rival mafia families, but because the one woman everyone had overlooked finally stopped giving more than anyone had ever asked. Long before sunrise painted the eastern sky, one light was always visible inside the Morelli estate. It came from the servants' kitchen, Every morning at exactly 4:30, Ivy Bennett unlocked the side entrance, carrying a weathered canvas bag that had belonged to her grandmother. She greeted the sleepy security guard by name, asked whether his daughter's fever had improved, and quietly placed a cup of fresh coffee beside him, before disappearing deeper into the mansion. Nobody had instructed her to do that. She simply remembered. Remembering people had always been Ivy's quiet gift. She remembered birthdays that employees themselves forgot. She remembered which gardener suffered from arthritis whenever rain was coming. She remembered that the youngest dishwasher secretly hated mushrooms, but was too embarrassed to complain. She remembered which bodyguards preferred black coffee after overnight patrols, and which chefs became anxious before hosting diplomatic dinners. To strangers, she was merely another maid. To those who had worked inside the estate for years, she was something impossible to describe. She was the invisible thread holding hundreds of daily moments together. The Morelli estate stretched across acres of manicured gardens overlooking the Atlantic coastline. It resembled a luxury resort more than a private residence, employing nearly 80 people across housekeeping, security, landscaping, maintenance, transportation, administration, and hospitality. Everything appeared effortless. Crystal chandeliers sparkled. Gardens bloomed in perfect symmetry. Luxury cars waited polished outside the entrance. Guests praised the flawless service. No visitor ever saw the tiny disasters prevented before breakfast. That was Ivy's work. When a chauffeur overslept after working 3 consecutive night shifts, Ivy quietly arranged another driver before anyone noticed. When imported flowers arrived damaged, she redesigned the arrangements herself using blooms from the greenhouse. When a nervous young maid accidentally broke antique china worth thousands of dollars, Ivy stayed late to earn extra money until the replacement could be purchased anonymously. No reports, no recognition, no complaints, just solutions. The older employees often exchanged knowing glances whenever someone praised how smoothly the estate operated. They knew the truth. The mansion wasn't running because of expensive systems or strict management. It ran because Ivy noticed every problem before it became someone else's. Around 7 each morning, the staff gathered briefly before beginning their assigned duties. The elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Evelyn Carter, watched Ivy moving quietly between departments, checking schedules while carrying fresh linens balanced effortlessly in her arms. One of the newer employees whispered, "How does she know where everyone is all the time?" Mrs. Carter smiled, "Because she pays attention when everyone else is busy being important." The younger maid frowned, "But she's just housekeeping." Mrs. Carter's expression softened. "No, dear. Housekeeping is her job. Caring for this place is who she is." Few people understood where that devotion came from. Years earlier, after Ivy's parents died in a highway accident, she had been raised by her grandmother in a small coastal town. They had little money, but never lacked kindness. Her grandmother brushed Ivy's long hair every evening while repeating the same words. "Hair grows because hope grows. As long as you care for both, no one can truly take your dignity." When illness finally claimed the older woman, Ivy kept growing her hair, not out of vanity, but because every inch reminded her of the only home she had ever known. She carried those memories with her into every difficult day. Most employees never knew. She never talked about herself. She listened instead. That was why frightened new workers somehow found themselves confiding in her after only a few conversations. She never judged, never gossiped, never repeated anyone's secrets. Even Dante Morelli had noticed her, though only in passing. The feared Mafia Boss spent most of his life negotiating multi-million-dollar shipping contracts, resolving conflicts between powerful families, and protecting an empire built over decades. Weeks often passed without him spending more than a single evening at his own estate. Whenever he returned, everything appeared exactly as it should. Dinner arrived on time. Meetings flowed smoothly. Guests departed impressed. He naturally assumed that was simply how the household functioned. He had no idea someone was quietly ensuring it. Occasionally, as he crossed the foyer before another business trip, he would nod toward Ivy. "Thank you. Everything looks perfect." She always smiled politely. "My pleasure, sir." The exchange lasted only seconds, yet someone else noticed every one of them. Vanessa Sterling. Elegant. Beautiful. Born into one of the state's most influential political families. Officially engaged to Dante for nearly a year. She understood wealth. She understood appearances. She understood power. But she did not understand why the most feared man on the East Coast occasionally thanked a plus-size maid with genuine respect. At first, she dismissed it. Then she began watching. Every quiet compliment. Every small nod. Every moment Dante acknowledged Ivy's work without even realizing he was doing it. A tiny seed of jealousy took root. It grew slowly, silently, patiently, and by the time Dante left for a week-long negotiation with rival mafia families in Chicago, Vanessa had already convinced herself of something that wasn't true. She believed Ivy Bennett wasn't simply a maid. She believed she was competition. Vanessa smiled as she watched Dante's convoy disappear beyond the estate gates. For the next 7 days, she would be the one in charge. The morning after Dante Morelli departed for Chicago, the atmosphere inside the estate changed almost immediately. For years, the household had followed an unspoken rhythm built on cooperation. Every department trusted the others. Problems were solved quietly before they reached management. It was an efficient system created not through fear, but through mutual respect. Vanessa Sterling intended to replace that culture with obedience. She summoned every department head to the main drawing room. Dressed elegantly in an ivory designer suit, she stood beneath an enormous crystal chandelier with the confidence of someone who believed authority could simply be inherited. "While Dante is away," she announced, "all decisions come through me. I expect perfection, loyalty, and absolute discipline." No one challenged her. The senior employees exchanged silent glances. Mrs. Carter lowered her eyes. The head gardener sighed quietly. Even the security captain simply nodded. They all understood one thing. 7 days could feel very long. Within hours, Vanessa began making changes. Several longtime servants were reassigned to less desirable duties. A new personal assistant arrived from her family's estate and immediately started criticizing procedures that had worked flawlessly for years. Employees were ordered to seek approval for even the smallest decisions. The mansion became quieter. Not calmer, just quieter. People had stopped speaking freely. Only Ivy continued her work, exactly as before. She greeted everyone with the same gentle smile. She prepared breakfast trays. She helped a nervous young maid learn the proper silverware arrangement. She reminded the pastry chef that one of the visiting diplomats was allergic to almonds. She never questioned Vanessa's authority. She simply focused on helping wherever she could. To Ivy, kindness had never depended on who was in charge. 3 days later, the estate prepared for an important diplomatic dinner. Several influential investors, politicians, and business partners would attend before Dante's return. Vanessa considered the evening her opportunity to prove she was already capable of managing the Morelli household. Every flower arrangement was inspected, every wine glass measured, every chair positioned with mathematical precision. The dining hall resembled a masterpiece, until Ivy noticed one small mistake. At the center of the table, The seating cards for two rival businessmen had accidentally been switched. Most people would never have recognized the problem. Ivy did. She remembered their history from a banquet nearly 2 years earlier. Those two men had refused to sit beside one another after a bitter legal dispute. If left unchanged, the mistake could embarrass the Morelli family before distinguished guests. She quietly approached Vanessa. "Miss Sterling," Ivy said softly, "I believe 2 place cards may have been exchanged by accident." Vanessa barely looked at her. "They're correct. I only thought. I didn't ask what you thought." Ivy hesitated. "I apologize. I only wanted to prevent an uncomfortable situation." Before Vanessa could respond, one of the estate managers walked past, noticed the arrangement, and immediately frowned. "Oh." He quickly exchanged the 2 cards. "Good catch." He smiled politely toward Ivy. "Thank you." The correction took less than 5 seconds. But for Vanessa, it lasted forever. She saw several employees glance toward Ivy with quiet admiration. In her mind, the maid had corrected her, publicly. The dinner itself proceeded successfully. The guests never knew how close the evening had come to awkward disaster. Vanessa smiled throughout the event. She laughed gracefully. She accepted compliments. Yet beneath the polished exterior, humiliation simmered into resentment. After the final guests departed and the staff began cleaning the ballroom, Vanessa called everyone into the grand hall. Her voice echoed through the marble corridors. "I have something that needs to be addressed." Nearly every employee gathered: housekeepers, chefs, the drivers, gardeners, security personnel. No one understood why they had been summoned so late. Vanessa walked slowly toward Ivy. "You seem to enjoy making corrections." Ivy looked genuinely confused. "I was only trying to help." "Help?" Vanessa laughed coldly. "Or were you trying to impress Dante?" A ripple of discomfort spread through the room. Ivy blinked. "I would never. Don't lie." Vanessa stepped closer. "I've watched the way he thanks you. I've watched you pretending to be modest. You think because you're useful, you're important." The accusation stunned everyone. Ivy lowered her eyes. "Miss Sterling, I have never wanted anything except to do my work well." "Your work?" Vanessa's gaze settled on Ivy's long chestnut hair. "It certainly seems you've taken excellent care of your appearance." Without warning, Vanessa reached toward a nearby supply cart. Someone had left a pair of heavy tailoring scissors after unpacking decorative linens. She picked them up. Mrs. Carter gasped. "Miss Sterling!" The older woman instinctively stepped forward. One sharp look from Vanessa stopped her. "You forget who you're speaking to." Silence swallowed the hall. Vanessa grabbed a handful of Ivy's hair. For the first time, fear appeared in Ivy's eyes. Not because of pain, because she instantly remembered her grandmother. Every evening, every gentle braid, every promise that dignity could survive hardship. The blades closed. A harsh metallic snap echoed across the marble floor. Then another. Then another. Thick strands of chestnut hair slipped from Vanessa's hand and drifted slowly onto Ivy's apron. No one moved. Several maids covered their mouths to stop themselves from crying. A young gardener clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. The security captain stared straight ahead, knowing that intervening against the boss's fiancée could cost everyone their livelihoods. Vanessa finally released the remaining uneven hair. "There," she smiled. "Now perhaps you'll remember your place." For several endless seconds, the entire mansion seemed to stop breathing. Ivy slowly knelt. She gathered every lock of hair with extraordinary care, almost as though she were picking up pieces of her past. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but none fell. Instead, she stood, reached gently toward Vanessa, and said only 3 words. "The scissors, please." Vanessa, momentarily confused, handed them over. Without trembling, without anger, without raising her voice, Ivy lifted the blades and cut away the rest of her hair herself. Short, even, practical. When the final strand fell, she placed the scissors carefully on the nearby table. She looked directly at Vanessa. There was no hatred in her expression, only quiet disappointment. "You just made a mistake you'll never understand." Then she bowed politely. "Excuse me." She picked up her cleaning cart and calmly walked away. Behind her, more than 70 employees remained frozen in complete silence. No applause, no shouting, no protest. Only the unbearable realization that something precious inside the Morelli estate had just been broken, and none of them yet understood how much that single act of cruelty would cost them all. The following morning, Ivy Bennett arrived at the estate at exactly 4:30, just as she had every day for the past 4 years. The only difference was her hair. Where a thick braid had once rested against her back, short chestnut strands now framed her face. Every employee she passed paused for a moment before quietly lowering their eyes. No one mentioned what had happened. No one dared. Ivy greeted the security guard with her usual gentle smile, signed the attendance ledger, collected her cleaning supplies, and began her assigned duties. She dusted the west corridor, changed the linens in the guest suites, polished the marble staircase, restocked towels in the private spa. Everything listed in her job description was completed with the same care as always. Nothing more. At first, no one noticed. Mrs. Carter almost asked Ivy whether she could help train a nervous new housemaid, as she always did. The request stopped on her lips. She remembered. That had never been Ivy's responsibility. It had simply been another kindness she offered without being asked. By lunchtime, the first cracks began to appear. A new kitchen assistant accidentally prepared mushroom soup for a senior accountant with a severe allergy. Normally, Ivy would have noticed the menu while passing through the kitchen and quietly suggested a substitute before the meal was served. This time, she walked past. Not because she was angry, because she was carrying fresh towels to the second floor. The soup reached the dining room before the mistake was discovered. The chef spent 20 frantic minutes preparing a replacement. He looked toward the hallway where Ivy disappeared. Only then did he realize she had saved him from similar mistakes dozens of times before. That afternoon, one of the chauffeurs arrived nearly 40 minutes late to collect an important attorney from the airport. He had mistakenly copied the wrong departure time onto his schedule. Normally, Ivy compared transportation logs every morning while delivering coffee to the administrative office. She caught scheduling conflicts almost instinctively. Today, she never entered the office. It wasn't part of her job. The attorney waited. The delay embarrassed the estate. By evening, the atmosphere felt strangely unfamiliar. Nothing catastrophic had happened. Yet nothing felt effortless anymore. The mansion no longer moved with quiet harmony. Instead, every department struggled alone. The following day brought even more confusion. Fresh flowers intended for an elderly charity board were delivered to the private library instead of the reception hall. The rare orchids reserved for a diplomatic guest remained forgotten inside the greenhouse until they wilted under the afternoon sun. The florist blamed housekeeping. Housekeeping blamed administration. Administration blamed the delivery team. Arguments that had never existed before suddenly became common. No one recognized the missing link connecting everything together. Ivy had never managed those departments. She had simply spoken to people. She reminded, suggested, noticed. Now she did none of those things. Late that afternoon, a young maid burst into tears after breaking an expensive crystal vase while cleaning the music room. Several months earlier, Ivy would have quietly comforted her, helped gather the shattered pieces, and found a solution before management even heard about the accident. Instead, Ivy walked into the room, saw the broken glass, and calmly asked, "Has your supervisor been informed?" The frightened girl nodded through tears. "Yes." Ivy offered a sympathetic smile. "I'm sorry that happened." Then she picked up her cleaning cart and continued down the hallway. The young maid stared after her in disbelief, not because Ivy had become cold, because for the first time, Ivy had allowed someone else to carry the weight of their own mistake. That evening, Mrs. Carter found Ivy eating dinner alone in the staff cafeteria. The older woman sat across from her. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Mrs. Carter whispered, "My dear, you've become very quiet." Ivy looked down at her untouched cup of tea. "I've always been quiet." "No, you've always been kind." The words lingered between them. Mrs. Carter reached across the table. "You don't have to carry this alone." A faint smile touched Ivy's lips. "I'm not carrying anything. I'm simply doing the work I was hired to do. Nothing more, nothing less." Mrs. Carter's eyes filled with tears. She understood exactly what Ivy meant. The estate had spent years accepting gifts that were never part of her salary. Her patience, her memory, her compassion, her willingness to solve problems that belonged to everyone else. Now those gifts had quietly disappeared. No one had appreciated them until they were gone. 3 days after the incident, the head of security stormed into the operations office. 2 patrol teams had accidentally been assigned to the same section of the property, while another entrance remained completely uncovered for nearly an hour. Fortunately, no security threat occurred. Still, the mistake was unprecedented. The captain reviewed every document twice. Everything appeared correct. Only later did he remember that Ivy usually carried updated shift notes between departments whenever schedules changed at the last minute. She had never been asked. She had simply noticed that paperwork often moved too slowly. Across the estate, similar realizations unfolded. The gardeners suddenly remembered Ivy bringing bottles of water during summer heatwaves. The laundry staff recalled how she reorganized delivery carts whenever someone called in sick. The night guards realized she always prepared sandwiches before overnight storms because restaurants outside the estate closed early. None of those actions had ever been required. She had simply cared. And now, she still cared. But she no longer believed it was her place to interfere. By the 5th day, even Vanessa began noticing the difference. She walked through the mansion expecting flawless service. Instead, she found anxious employees rushing through unfinished tasks. The breakfast room had opened 10 minutes late. Fresh linens had been delivered to the wrong guest suites. An important package intended for Dante's private office remained unopened because no one realized it had arrived. Vanessa called an emergency staff meeting. Her voice echoed sharply through the hall. "What is happening to this household?" No one answered. She demanded explanations. The department managers blamed one another. The chefs blamed housekeeping. Housekeeping blamed scheduling. Scheduling blamed transportation. The room filled with accusations. Standing quietly near the back, Ivy listened without speaking. For years, she would have stepped forward with calm suggestions, gently connecting each department until everyone understood how to fix the problem. Now she remained silent, not out of revenge, out of respect. She had finally accepted that doing everyone else's work had never truly been her responsibility. Vanessa's eyes swept across the room before stopping on Ivy. For a brief moment, she expected the maid to offer another solution, another rescue, another miracle. Ivy simply lowered her notebook after recording her cleaning assignments. Nothing else. Vanessa dismissed the meeting in frustration. As the employees slowly filed out, an elderly gardener quietly murmured to Mrs. Carter, "I thought removing her hair would humiliate her." Mrs. Carter watched Ivy disappear down the corridor. No, they only removed what everyone could see. What they failed to notice was everything she had been carrying that no one else ever did. Far beyond the estate walls, Dante Morelli's convoy was already making its return journey home. None of the people waiting for him realized that within the next 24 hours, the boss would notice something no one had been able to hide. Not the missing flowers, not the scheduling errors, not the delayed meals. He would notice the silence. And once Dante Morelli started asking questions, someone would finally have to answer. Late Friday afternoon, the iron gates of the Morelli estate swung open. A convoy of black SUVs rolled slowly up the long stone driveway, escorted by armed security vehicles. Employees standing near the entrance instinctively straightened their posture. Dante Morelli had returned. For most people, his arrival inspired a mixture of admiration and fear. He possessed the calm confidence of a man whose decisions shaped the lives of thousands. Rivals feared his intelligence more than his power, because he rarely needed to raise his voice to command absolute obedience. As he stepped from the lead vehicle, he paused. Something felt different, not wrong, heavy. The mansion had always welcomed him with a quiet sense of order. Even after exhausting business trips, he could walk through the entrance and immediately feel that every detail had already been handled. Today the silence felt strained. Employees greeted him respectfully, but few met his eyes. The butler's smile looked forced. 2 young housemaids exchanged nervous glances before quickly looking away. Even several veteran capos, men who had negotiated with dangerous crime families without blinking, appeared unusually uncomfortable. Dante noticed everything. He simply said nothing. Instead, he continued walking. Inside the grand foyer, Vanessa greeted him with a bright smile and an affectionate embrace. "You must be exhausted." "It was productive," Dante replied. She immediately began describing the successful diplomatic dinner she had hosted, the improvements she had made throughout the estate, and the efficiency of the household during his absence. Dante listened politely, yet his attention kept drifting elsewhere. Small imperfections surrounded him. A painting in the west corridor hung slightly crooked. Fresh lilies in the entrance hall had begun to wilt. A security report rested unopened on a side table. Individually, none of those details mattered. Together, they formed a pattern. This house never overlooked details. Someone had stopped seeing them. As they walked toward his office, a familiar voice quietly greeted him. "Welcome home, Mr. Morelli." Dante turned. For a brief second, he failed to recognize her. Ivy Bennett stood holding a basket of freshly folded linens. Her posture remained the same. Her gentle smile remained the same. But her long chestnut hair was gone. Short waves rested just beneath her jawline. Dante slowed to a stop. "Ivy." She inclined her head respectfully. "It's good to have you back, sir." He studied her for a moment. "You changed your hair." She touched it almost absent-mindedly. "Yes." "I wanted a change." Her answer came smoothly. Too smoothly. During the years he had known Ivy, Dante had developed an unusual confidence in reading people. It was one of the reasons his empire had survived countless betrayals. People lied with words. Truth lived elsewhere. In their eyes, their breathing, their silence. Ivy was lying, not maliciously, protectively. He nodded once. "It suits you." A faint smile crossed her face. "Thank you." She excused herself and continued down the hallway. Dante watched until she disappeared around the corner. Then he turned toward Vanessa. "When did she cut her hair?" Vanessa shrugged casually. "A few days ago." "Why?" "I suppose women get bored." The answer felt empty. He said nothing more. That evening, Dante reviewed business reports in his study, but his concentration drifted repeatedly toward the unusual atmosphere inside the estate. Twice, meetings started late because documents had been misplaced. Dinner arrived almost 15 minutes behind schedule. A guest bedroom prepared for an overnight visitor lacked fresh towels. These were mistakes he had never seen before. Near midnight, he called the estate manager into his office. The middle-aged administrator entered, looking unusually tense. "Has something changed while I was away?" The manager hesitated. "No, sir. Everything is under control." Dante closed the folder in front of him. "I've spent 20 years negotiating with men who built entire criminal organizations on deception." He looked directly at the manager. "I know when someone isn't telling me everything." Silence. The manager swallowed hard. Finally, he answered carefully. "The staff has been adjusting." "To what?" Another pause. "The changes." "What changes?" The man lowered his eyes. "I don't think it's my place to say." Dante dismissed him without another word. That answer troubled him far more than any explanation could have. The next morning, he began asking questions quietly, not as a mafia boss, as an observer. He spoke with the head chef while inspecting the kitchens. The chef praised the staff, but admitted mistakes had become strangely frequent. "What changed?" The chef sighed. "I honestly don't know." He hesitated. "Or perhaps—" He stopped himself. Dante waited. "Go on." The chef shook his head. "It isn't my story to tell." Later, Dante walked through the gardens with the landscaping supervisor. The elderly man admitted flower deliveries had become increasingly disorganized. Again, Dante asked why. Again came nearly the same answer. "I don't believe I should say." Throughout the afternoon, conversation after conversation followed the same pattern. Nobody lied. Nobody blamed anyone. Nobody mentioned Vanessa. Instead, every employee unknowingly pointed toward a single uncomfortable truth. Ever since Ivy Bennett stopped helping beyond her assigned responsibilities, everything had begun falling apart. The realization unsettled Dante more than he expected. He had never instructed Ivy to coordinate departments, never promoted her, never assigned additional authority. Yet somehow the entire household had relied upon her invisible efforts. How had he never noticed? That evening, he found Ivy arranging fresh towels outside the guest wing. She worked quietly, just as she always had. "Ivy." She turned. "Sir, I've spoken with several department heads today." She remained silent. "They all seem to miss something." A gentle smile appeared. "I'm sure everyone will settle into a new routine." "Is that what you think?" "I believe people are capable of adapting." Dante studied her closely. "Were you unhappy here?" The question caught her by surprise. "No." "Have I treated you unfairly?" She looked genuinely confused. "Never." "Then why does it feel like I've failed you?" For the first time, emotion flickered across Ivy's face. She lowered her eyes. "You've always treated me with respect." And yet, she took a slow breath. Sometimes respect isn't enough if people only see what you do, and never what you quietly carry. She realized she had said too much. "I'm sorry." "Please excuse me." She bowed politely and walked away before he could ask another question. Those words stayed with Dante long after she disappeared. Late that night, unable to sleep, he wandered through the estate grounds. Near the greenhouse, he noticed the elderly head gardener trimming rose bushes beneath the moonlight. The old man had served the Morelli family for over 30 years. If anyone understood the soul of the estate, it was him. Dante approached quietly. "You've known Ivy a long time." The gardener nodded. "Since her first week. Tell me something honestly." The old man rested both hands on his pruning shears. "What happened while I was gone?" For several long moments, only the sound of the evening wind filled the garden. Finally, the gardener spoke. "Sir, I've buried friends. I've watched this family survive wars between powerful men, but I have never seen this house so ashamed." Dante felt his heartbeat slow. Ashamed of what? The old man's eyes glistened. Miss Sterling cut off Ivy's hair. The world seemed to stop. She did what? In front of everyone. The gardener's voice trembled. "Your grandmother always said a person's dignity should never be taken away before witnesses." Miss Ivy never cried. She finished cutting the rest herself. Then she returned to work the next morning, as though nothing had happened. Dante stared into the darkness. His expression remained perfectly still. Only the tightening of his jaw revealed the storm beneath. The gardener continued softly. "She didn't punish us, sir. She simply stopped giving us everything she had been giving for free." A long silence followed. When Dante finally spoke, his voice was almost frighteningly calm. "Thank you." The gardener nodded. As Dante turned toward the mansion, every member of his security team instinctively stepped aside. They had seen their boss angry before. They had seen him ruthless, but they had almost never seen him silent, because everyone who knew Dante Morelli understood one thing. His quietest decisions were always his most devastating. And before another day passed, the entire Morelli estate would witness one of those decisions unfold before their own eyes. 2 days later, every employee at the Morelli estate received an unexpected invitation. Dante Morelli was hosting the annual estate appreciation banquet. The celebration usually honored the loyalty and hard work of the household staff, but this year's gathering had not been scheduled. Its sudden announcement sparked quiet curiosity throughout the mansion. Vanessa, however, interpreted it differently. Standing before a full-length mirror while assistants adjusted her emerald evening gown, she smiled with satisfaction. Surely Dante wanted to celebrate her successful management of the estate. Perhaps, she thought, he would finally introduce her publicly as the future Lady Morelli. She never imagined that the evening had been arranged for an entirely different reason. By sunset, the grand ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. Long tables overflowed with elegant dishes prepared by the estate's finest chefs. Housekeepers sat beside gardeners. Drivers laughed with accountants. Security officers shared stories with kitchen staff. It was one of the rare evenings when rank disappeared. Only Vanessa noticed one unusual detail. Instead of sitting beside Dante at the head table, she had been seated one chair away. The place beside Dante remained empty. She frowned but said nothing. Perhaps it was a surprise. When everyone had taken their seats, Dante slowly rose. The room fell silent immediately. He looked across the hundreds of familiar faces. Many had worked for his family for decades. Some had watched him grow from a quiet young man into one of the most powerful mafia leaders on the East Coast. Tonight, however, he spoke not as a boss, but as the head of a family. "I've spent many years believing this estate functioned because of discipline." He paused. "I was wrong." The employees exchanged puzzled glances. Dante continued. "I recently discovered that someone has been carrying responsibilities that were never listed in any contract." His gaze moved slowly through the room before stopping on Ivy. She sat quietly near the middle tables, clearly wishing no attention would fall upon her. Then Dante asked a single question. "Who here has ever been helped by Ivy Bennett?" Silence filled the ballroom. For one heartbeat. No one moved. Then Mrs. Carter slowly stood. "She helped me after my husband passed away. I couldn't return to work. She quietly completed half my duties for nearly a month, without asking for recognition." Another chair scraped across the floor. The head chef stood. "When my son was hospitalized, Miss Ivy prepared my morning inventory every day before I arrived, so I could spend more time with my family. A chauffeur rose next. She reminded me of my wedding anniversary. I would have forgotten. A gardener stood. She carried water to us during every summer heatwave. Then a bodyguard. She always prepared sandwiches before overnight security shifts. Another. And another. Housekeepers, laundry workers, receptionists, drivers, florists, electricians, maintenance crews, administrative assistants, senior capos. Even the estate physician slowly rose from his chair. Within moments, nearly the entire ballroom stood. Dozens upon dozens of people. Everywhere Dante looked, employees remained standing with quiet gratitude in their eyes. Only one person remained seated. Vanessa. She looked around in stunned disbelief. How could a maid command this much loyalty? Dante allowed the silence to settle. Then he walked away from the head table. Instead of approaching Vanessa, he stopped beside Ivy. She instinctively began to stand. He gently motioned for her to remain seated. "They told me," he said softly enough for the room to hear every word, "that you were only a maid." He paused. "They forgot to tell me that you've been holding this family together." Tears immediately filled Ivy's eyes. She lowered her head, overwhelmed by a tension she had spent her entire life avoiding. Dante turned toward the gathered employees. "I failed to notice the person who protected this home while I was protecting everything outside it. For that, I owe Ivy Bennett an apology." The most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast inclined his head. Not dramatically, not symbolically. Sincerely. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Vanessa shot to her feet. "Dante! You cannot be serious. She's an employee." He faced her calmly. "No, she's family." Vanessa laughed bitterly. "So you're choosing a maid over your fiancée?" "I'm choosing character over cruelty." Her expression hardened. "It was only hair." Dante's eyes became cold. "No, it was dignity. You humiliated a loyal employee before witnesses. You abused authority to satisfy your jealousy. If you can do that to the weakest person in this house, you could one day do it to anyone." The room was perfectly still. Dante reached into his jacket pocket. Slowly. He removed the engagement ring Vanessa had given him during their formal announcement months earlier. He placed it carefully on the table between them. "Our engagement ends tonight." Vanessa's face turned pale. "You would destroy our family's alliance because of her?" "No," he answered quietly. "You destroyed it yourself." Security approached respectfully. Not because Dante ordered Vanessa removed, but because she no longer belonged at the head of the Morelli family. Without another word, she gathered her purse and walked toward the ballroom doors. No one stopped her. No one defended her. For the first time in her life, money and influence could not purchase respect. As the doors closed behind her, the room remained silent. Then someone began clapping. Mrs. Carter. Another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. Not for Dante, for Ivy. She covered her face, unable to stop the tears she had refused to shed days earlier. These were not tears of humiliation. They were tears of finally being seen. When the applause softened, Dante addressed the staff once more. "Beginning today, we will establish an estate leadership council. It will ensure that no person's contribution is ever ignored again." He looked toward Ivy. "I would like you to oversee staff welfare and household operations. The position is yours if you accept it." Ivy stared at him in disbelief. I'm just a maid." A gentle voice answered before Dante could speak. Mrs. Carter smiled through tears. "No, my dear. You were never just a maid. You were the reason this place felt like home." The entire ballroom nodded in agreement. Months passed. The atmosphere inside the estate slowly returned. Only this time it was stronger. Departments communicated openly. Employees received proper recognition. No one was expected to carry invisible burdens alone. New staff members often smiled with surprise when the elegant woman welcoming them during orientation introduced herself. "I'm Ivy. If you ever need help, please ask." Many later discovered that before every major family gathering, charity event, diplomatic reception, or important celebration, Dante requested only one opinion before making his final decision. Ivy's. Not because she held power, because she understood people. One quiet afternoon, they walked together through the estate gardens where spring flowers bloomed beneath the warm sunlight. Dante stopped beside the old stone fountain. "I've been wanting to say something." She smiled gently. "I know. I'm sorry. I should have seen the truth much sooner." Ivy looked toward the roses swaying softly in the breeze. "My grandmother used to tell me that kindness doesn't become less valuable simply because people fail to notice it." She met his eyes. "You didn't fall in love with me because of my hair. You finally saw me because I stopped hiding behind it." Dante reached out carefully, giving her every opportunity to step away. Instead, she placed her hand in his. "I should have seen you long before that," he whispered. Together they continued walking beneath the evening sky, no longer as a mafia boss and a maid, but as two people who had discovered that love built upon admiration could survive any humiliation. That respect earned through quiet sacrifice would always outlast power gained through fear, and that the strongest heart inside any home was often the one that had spent years asking for nothing in return. Behind them, the Morelli estate stood peaceful once more, not because one woman carried everyone else's burdens in silence, but because her quiet strength had finally inspired